Welcome back to Pivot Point. I'm your host, Dave Allen, founder of Brandpie, the brand consultancy working with businesses to deliver impact at pivotal moments in their journey. Being a good person and being a great leader are not mutually exclusive, and Nigel Branker is perfect proof. His leadership is grounded in empathy. He's not afraid to shy away from money in order to nurture trust and invest in brand equity. Nigel's path to becoming Securian Canada's CEO wasn't perfectly choreographed, but his values have shone through at every pivotal step. Meet the leader who dares to give CEOs a great name, the leader for whom authenticity and empathy is the greatest USP, the leader who always does the right thing because culture is about what you do when nobody's looking. Welcome, Nigel. Thank you for joining us on Pivot Points today. Would you mind just giving an introduction to yourself so that our listeners can understand a little bit about your background?
Well, firstly, thank you, Dave, for having me. It's a real treat to be on here. And I love the format of your podcast, and I've listened to quite a few of them. In terms of my background, I lead a company called Securian Canada, which is a top 10 life and health insurance company in Canada. I'd say my journey to this point has been, anything but a straight line. I immigrated to Canada when I was a teenager about 30 years ago. And I've had many twists and turns and, many good mentors and experiences that have shaped the leader I am today and what I'm trying to accomplish with this organization.
Fantastic. And when you emigrated to Canada, that must have been a big decision. People at a young age don't often choose to change country. What sort of inspired you to do that? And that must have been a huge pivotal moment for you and your family.
Well, it was a huge pivotal moment. I wouldn't say I would say I was impacted by it more than I made the decision. At the time I was a teenager, and my single mother moved to Canada with myself and my sister. So the three of us moved to Canada as a family unit. I would say what went into her thinking at the time was that she wanted us to have an opportunity to get a post-secondary education to, build something in our lives. And she really had no idea how it would turn out. It turned out, well for both of us. We went on to be university educated. I went on to qualify as an actuary. But I remember a lot of those early years with my mother having 3 jobs and taking multiple buses and some of the sacrifices she made to build that life. And I think it's really embedded a lot of empathy and perspective in me that I try to keep to this day.
Fantastic. And not many people want to be an actuary at a young age. It certainly was never on my radar when I came out of university. What attracted you to that?
And I'm not sure it was on my radar either. I went to the University of Western Ontario. I started in pure mathematics, and I was more of a pure science kind of guy doing, physics and math. And it wasn't until my third year that the light bulb went on and that I wouldn't be able to stay in university forever. And eventually I'd need a job. So I had a friend who said, there's this thing called, actuarial science or being an actuary, and you basically can get salary increases if you pass exams. So that was the draw for me. I thought I was half decent at passing exams, and I would, give that a whirl. So that's how I backed into it, really. And then I got hired in a consulting firm, and I really cut my teeth in consultancy before moving to the management and leadership side of it. And so when I speak to students these days, I always tell them, don't think that your career has to be a perfectly choreographed and mapped out sequence of events. That often it's just make the next decision with the information you have and trust the process, and it'll be okay.
Yeah. And when you reflect back and think of those days, did you ever think you'd be CEO of an organization like Securian Canada way back then?
Absolutely not. It was never on my radar. I remember one of my first pivotal moments, I'd say the first half of my career, I spent time more as an individual contributor more than anything else. And when I took on my first leadership or management role, I remember thinking at the time, hey, listen, I've had a mixed bag of leaders. I've never really thought of myself as a leader. But at the end of the day, it's not that it's not that hard, but I think if you lead with empathy, it's okay, right? If you come from it from a pure spot that you want to, yes, achieve business results, but help your people and your stakeholders and your customers. And I really started to view it as I matured as, leadership is really a privilege to help others as much as you can. And if you kind of go into it with that mindset, then it becomes a more natural evolution looking back on my career.
Yeah. And I've interviewed and had the privilege of interviewing some fantastic leaders, and just hearing you talk about leadership, it's making me think that leadership itself, or CEOs, seem to get a bad rap from the press. And so many of the leaders I've talked to have real care, real empathy. They want to look after their people. They've got a responsibility to their businesses. I just love your take on what you think of leadership and how the wider public now sees you as a chief executive.
Well, I think like anything else, when I look at the era we live in, I think one of our biggest struggles, there's so much data and information overload, is I think we get trapped into very black and white thinking. And I think so many of life and business problems are not black and white, and there's a healthy level of gray, and it's important to be able to see different perspectives. So I think being a leader of a for-profit organization, of course, there's a commercial part of hitting your numbers and satisfying your shareholders. But I think like anything else, if it's unbridled and it's done in excess, you lose sight of the impact you have and you could have on people, whether those are your employees, your customers, your partners. And so I think balance and a balanced perspective is really important. I think being grounded in humility gives you that perspective. But on your point about the public sometimes giving CEOs a bad rap, I think there are some CEOs who make decisions that maybe are overweight in the interest of their shareholders and not other stakeholders. And so in those cases, I think it's warranted.
And how have you seen that change over the last couple of decades as you've sort of gone into leadership? Because certainly my perspective, when I first came into sort of a CEO role back in the 90s, every company annual report I read said our mission is to maximize profit for shareholders, basically. And it doesn't feel like that anymore. It feels like there's a much more intelligent balance now in the world of business.
I would agree. I would say there is more of a balance. I'd say that balance also brings with it a healthy and sometimes unhealthy tension, because a lot of those principles that you alluded to when you were a CEO still exist, right? We're still here to create shareholder value and add to the bottom line. But if I look at, I think it's actually a really challenging but wonderful time to be a senior leader, because there's so many precedented challenges for which there's no playbook, right? Whether it's AI or remote work or bad press around inclusion and diversity or climate change. And so I do think we've seen a generation of evolved leaders who care about the community, care about their people, still try to find that balance with shareholders and creating long-term value. And you still have some that are a little overweight, but I think it's sort of a fun time to be a different type of leader and to set a different example. I'm often asked, what would I want my legacy to be if there is such a thing? And I hope when the time comes, I can look back and I can say that I've created a set of proof points that demonstrate being a good person and being a good business leader are not mutually exclusive.
How do you sort of reconcile that with your personal values and sort of shareholder expectation? Have you got any hints, tips and thoughts for our listeners? Because it's a constant challenge how you sort of get the balance right between the business of business and looking after your people and encouraging them and engaging with them, motivating them so that they are at their best for the organization.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say even before becoming a senior leader, for listeners, that I think this journey actually starts when you first take on any semblance of management responsibility. The first time you're a people leader and someone reports to you, I always tell our people leaders, being a people leader is continually about finding balance between the needs of the organization and the needs of the individual. And I think, if you're too overweight or too consistently overweight on one side or the other, you're not doing it right. So if you're always advocating for what's good for the company, that's probably not right. And if you're always advocating for your people, that's good, but it's probably not right either, because there is a balance. So I think of it as more of a long-term scorecard, right? So there are times if something happens, we need to ask our people to work on the weekend. It doesn't mean the norm is that we want our people to work on the weekend. And I think if you come from it at a place where it's more the exception, and when that happens, you allow them to flex a Friday and, take that time back, then you are achieving balance, right? I think it's when you're off balance that it's the norm that you work every weekend, and that's supposed to be part of your job. And, that's sort of our pound of flesh to add shareholder value. You're off kilter. So, listen, I think 80% of people are good human beings and we have a good moral compass. And somewhere in us, we know when the balance is off, right? And it's really just having the courage and the confidence to listen to that inner voice and continually strive for balance.
In terms of developing the skills to be a leader and, recognizing at what point in your life you became a leader, do you think leaders are born, or do you think they're created, or both? We've had some great conversations around that over a few of the podcasts. And
that is a great question. Are leaders born, created, or both? Yeah, I guess I would say I'm, and I hope this isn't cheating. I think I'm in the both camp, right? I mean, if you think about, I'll quote probably my favorite leadership book is Maxwell, the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, and there's this idea that at the end of the day, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. So I do think, depending on your life journey and your experience, you may pick up traits, or you may be predisposed to, influence, right? If you're sort of the youngest child and you learn, okay, well, how do I actually get the outcome I want? Or how do I get what I want for dinner? Or how do I get our parents to do something? So I think depending on your upbringing, you get some of those influence skills. And I think you build, empathy and caring. But I also think it can be developed. I think leadership is a skill like anything else. And if you put the time in to unlock your potential as a leader, but also your authenticity and your style, I think one of the challenges of leadership is we're sometimes given a blueprint that says, right, this is what a leader looks like. And it's not actually true, right? As a leader, your job is to come up with a strategy, bring others along, inspire others, get them to execute, measure the results. And there's a wide berth of styles that you can employ to achieve that. So I just think accepting like that there is balance between growing as a leader, achieving what you need to, but not being pigeonholed in a given style.
Yeah. And how would you characterize your style? Have you thought about that?
Well, I think my style is I'm very purpose driven. I lead with a lot of empathy, and I try to be extremely transparent and authentic. And it comes from a belief that, like most relationships, if you come in with a good intentions and you show up properly most times, that people will be supportive and forgiving. So I look at some of the complexity of things like remote work and work to office. Like, I actually don't think there's one right answer, right? There's so many ways you can go as a leader. It depends if you're in a big city, if people have long commutes. It depends if you're in a small area where you're one of the big employers in that economy, and having people in work actually supports the local economy. There's so many ways to go. So whatever you decide, but I think if you are honest with your people as to why you want to do this, that takes you a long way. I think where a lot of leaders maybe get into trouble is if they're a little more disingenuous, right? Or try to come up for reasons for the outcomes they want. Then I generally believe our people and our customers are really smart and they see through stuff. So it served me well to try to be as authentically. I mean, I always tell my teams I'm as transparent as I can be within the rules of regulation. If we're pursuing an M&A transaction or something, I can't talk about it. But otherwise, I think, being transparent and authentic is generally a good way to be. And that's how I would describe my style.
No, that's brilliant. And you said earlier on in that you're very purpose-driven. Is that something that has formed over time, or is that something you've had in you from a young age?
I think I've had that sense of purpose from a young age, and it's been honed over time. Probably the jump start I got in, sort of having more humble upbringing and beginnings is I think I grew up in a very community-based environment where you had, extended families and neighbors and friends. And what that taught me, and what's really anchored, is that the world is bigger than just you. When I think about sometimes like unbridled capitalism or unbridled individualism, I think we sometimes lose that, right? I think the way you make decisions can be different if you're only in it for what's best for you. I think when you think about ecosystems, future generations, what happens next, you make different decisions. And so to me, being purpose driven is really just that idea of it's a close cousin to humility. It's it's being anchored in, hey, the world and the community is bigger than just me, and others might be impacted by my decision. So let's think through it from different lenses.
And does that drive you?
Well, it does. I mean, I think, we all have, especially as leaders, we don't have infinite time to have an impact. So I think, you spend a lot of time honing your skill and getting to the point where you are a leader, and then you have a limited time to have a positive impact. So I think a lot about, how do I use my time as a leader? Yes, to achieve business results, but also to have a positive impact in as many lives as possible, and set up lasting systems that make it, better and easier, and for the next generation of leaders to continue the work.
Yeah. And in terms of things that you've created, or I know you've done some amazing things over the last sort of few years, but it'd be lovely to just talk about some of the things that you're really passionate about and the sorts of programs you've created, because they're fierce impressive.
Well, thanks, Dave. Probably what I'll talk about is a little bit of my role now leading Securian Canada. So Securian Canada is really a composite. I'm the first Canadian CEO of a series of, I think, 4 acquisitions we've made in Canada. And so a big part of my role is to, combine the Lego blocks in a way that makes something new. But the fun part of it has been saying, well, what does the market need, right? It's a little bit of Roger Martin, or where do you play and how do you win? So, like most markets in Canada, our space tends to be full of, competitive oligopolies, right? Dominated by a few big players. And what we found there is that a lot of people fall through the cracks. And so how do we be that carrier that uses technology to help people that fall through the cracks, to make things more accessible and easier and simpler and faster? And so shaping a culture like that, I mean, that's part of the reason we do research and we talk about newcomers to Canada and the gig economy. But I'm also a big believer of aligning your external brand and your internal brand. So then it became, well, what does our culture look like? Like, how do we create fuel for how we want to show up in the market? And so we lean in a lot to things like inclusion because we think it's a good proxy for psychological safety. And if we want our people to feel safe, ideating and challenging the status quo and helping us to be a disruptor, we need to create the right environment as well. So that energy of aligning who we want to be in the market and how we want our people to show up is a lot of fun. It's tricky, as you know, but if you get it right, I think aligning that external brand of who you want to be and what your people believe in and your values really fuels me, and it's really gratifying.
And what do you think are the sort of the rules of the game to achieve that? Because it is hard, and a lot of CEOs really struggle to get that honesty, that transparency, so that they're believed and their motivations are believed. So how have you built that platform where your people are fully engaged and you've got that alignment between external and internal? Because that's not easy to do.
Well, listen, I think no leader, no CEO can do it alone. So I think it starts with who's the team you're building and do they share your values? And so when I look at the executive team and the team we've built, I mean, they're little things, but I think they're important things. I'm happy that we're generally have some degree of gender parity. We're pretty balanced, male, female. We're fairly diverse. And so I think that's important because representation matters. Just say, hey, we actually walk the talk, right? We believe this, but this is also how we're showing up as a leadership team. And then my job becomes most of our leaders. I mean, you empower your people to make good decisions aligned with your values. Where I reinforce is when they're faced with tough challenges, right? When they say, hey, listen, we have to make a call between A or B. And then I try less to give the decision, but more to explain the thought process. Okay, let's map it out. If we do A, we win on these 3 criteria, but we lose on these 2. If we do B, maybe it's opposite. So ultimately, this boils down to what's most important to us. And so going through the thought process, and I think for our leaders and our teams to see that we consistently lead with our values, we consistently try to lead with good as much as we can. Of course, there are times we have to make tough business decisions to close an office or divest a business unit. But how we do it is equally important as what we do, right? And how we show up for our people and how we lead through those difficult moments. So that's a bit of what I try to bring to the table in the culture we're building and to keep driving that alignment.
Mm-hmm. And do you see a sort of a correlation between that thought process, that philosophy, and the brand and the reputation that you're building in the marketplace?
Well, 100%. I think when you think about being an insurance company, a life and health insurance company, we generally don't interact with customers unless something bad has happened. And so I think it's really important that we have right down to our call center, our frontline teams, that we have empathy. Of course, you build processes to help scale and to have consistent outcomes. But every now and again, if something falls through the cracks, if someone's had a bad claim experience because we didn't get back to them or their email was lost. Like, it's really how do we show up, right? And you can show up authentically with feeling to say, I'm so sorry you went through this. Let me make it right for you. And I think telling our teams and role modeling that that's okay. It's okay to have empathy. It's okay to be human. It's something I do worry about more existentially in an era of AI, that we might lose some of that, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's not something I personally would associate with the insurance industry. And I can see you smiling, and the rest of the people who are listening to this can't see you smiling. But is that making you very different?
Well, I think our goal is to not to stand out for the sake of standing out, but I think our goal is to lead in a very empathetic human way. And because of the nature of the industry, that probably means we stand out, right? I mean, hey, listen, like,
Yeah.
there's simple examples with an insurance company. There could be a claim that's on the cusp of, is it an eligible claim or not? And those are those pivotal moments where, well, if you err on the side of not paying the claim, you probably could create some more shareholder value. But if you err on the side of paying the claim, then you probably erode a little bit of shareholder value, but I think you build a more powerful brand
Yeah.
of who you want to be and how you want to show up for your customers. And those are simple micro calls that happen every day. And so again, our job as leaders is to ensure our people know where we stand. I always say culture is what people do when no one's looking. So how do we help them understand what we stand for and how to make the right decisions, without an executive in the room, that this is what we stand for and what we believe in. We will do everything we can to try to pay a claim because we're helping people often on the worst day of their life. And that's okay. That's who we want to be.
And how did you get from, I think you said 4 different organizations, how did you get to a single culture?
Well, I'd say it's still a work in progress. I'd say we're
Yeah.
80% of the way there. And like anything else, I'd say one of the big change management challenges. I mean, this is true of all of us, right? If you go into a new job or a new company, you bring a lot of your experience with you, and that's in a part why you're being hired. But the trade-off is to really help people understand we're not in Kansas anymore. So while you may have an experience at a different employer, while at that different employer the message might have been don't pay that claim, here the message is please try to pay the claim. And so that's really sort of the change management of not just building the culture, but reinforcing it through systems, through KPIs. What do we look for in behavior and what do we stand for as a firm? So that's where I'd say, we're sort of 80% there on the journey, but it still takes work to continue to build it. So I think not being afraid to hit the reset button and say, okay, let's assume we're starting from a clean slate. How would we do this?
Yeah. And how did those employees react? Because it's quite a big behavioral shift you're asking them, so that's significant rewiring of their brains.
Well, it's a work in progress, and I always say that I think engagement scores are a lagging indicator. Like, you don't manage the engagement scores, but engagement scores sort of tell us, hey, are we getting it right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so in our most recent Great Place to Work survey, I mean, I think our engagement score is in the mid 80s. Our trust in leadership is at 88. So
Wow.
I'd say it's working. I think we're doing
That's
some things
working.
right.
Yeah, that's really high. That's phenomenal. And I mean, great you track that. And, trust in leadership is something that, I mean, obviously it's earned. And you and your leadership team should be hugely congratulated for building that sort of level of trust. Has that affected retention rates and things like that at the organization?
Yeah, I think our retention is pretty positive and much better than our target KPIs.
Yeah.
I'll go back to something you said, though, about it being earned. And maybe that's I briefly mentioned that I started off my career on the consultancy side. And I think consulting is kind of fun because it teaches you to juggle different clients and different deadlines, and you see different business models. So I do think it's a really rich proofing ground. But one of the nice lessons that I reflect on as a consultant that I take with me as a leader is, with consultants, with clients, you can do an amazing project, but you only need to mess up one project to lose that trust, right? It's a lot of what have you done for me lately? And I think it's the same with leadership, right? I think so I'm proud we have that, that we've built that trust with our people, but I don't take it for granted. I think we have to prove ourselves every day as leaders as well. And that, as quickly as it's hard to build trust, it's easy to erode trust. So I always try to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, you probably have to do something like 10 actions to build trust, and only one bad action can destroy all.
Exactly.
I mean, just sort of going sideways a little bit. I mean, what sort of things do you do to relax? And in your leisure time, have you got sort of things that you're very passionate about?
Well, I'm a big soccer fan. I watch soccer. Up to recently, I played a fair bit of soccer as well. So that's, now I'll run more and exercise a bit more. But it's interesting. You kind of talked about being passionate, and part of my journey has been, I mean, there are definitely things I enjoy, and we like to travel a lot. But one of the hard parts of my journey as a leader is I'm an off the chart introvert, and so I bring a lot of energy to the role. So often my free time, I'm on vacation, I'm pretty happy to sit on a beach and do nothing and recharge. and
That I understand.
and so I think that's been an interesting journey as well as an introverted leader. And I've spent a lot of time on like, it doesn't mean you're shy, but how do you manage your energy and how do you direct your energy as well? And so I use a lot of my free time to do things that either feed my soul or replenish the bucket, right?
Yeah. And in terms of soccer, who do you support? Do you support one of the British teams, or?
I do. Well, I grew up in the Caribbean, so I had a lot of British influence. I'm a lifelong Liverpool fan, which is, like most clubs in the UK, could be pretty polarizing.
Yeah.
So but last season was a good season. And this season is a bit struggling, but that's okay. I am a lifelong, a Liverpool fan. You'll never walk alone. So I try to watch as many games as I can.
Fantastic. And I also every time we do one of these podcasts, we start to end with a fun fact. And one of the things that I understand is you're a bit of a Scrabble nut. I love playing Scrabble myself, but I would describe myself as a Scrabble amateur. But what's your background with the Scrabble game?
Oh, well, I love Scrabble. It's one of my favorite games. I'm actually I don't play competitively anymore, but I am a former Scrabble champion.
So how do you become a Scrabble champion?
Well, I think there's a few things, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but there's a lot of math. There's a remarkable amount of math in Scrabble. My namesake, we share the name. The probably the best Scrabble player ever is a guy named Nigel Richards. He's from New Zealand, and he's the French champion, or he's won a French championship. He just won the Spanish championship, and he doesn't speak a word of French or Spanish. He just memorizes all the words and sees the patterns. And so what's fun for me is now my wife is originally from Quebec, and we will play Scrabble. But we'll play Scrabble sometimes in French, which is her native language, not mine. And I probably win a third of the games, but that's kind of a fun thing to play where you have a pretty limited vocabulary and you're just optimizing points. So I think having that math brain helps a little bit in nerding out and playing Scrabble. But then it's a fun game, and I'm always amazed at guys like Nigel Richards who can just decide they're going to go into a championship in a language they don't speak, memorize the words, and go win. It's nuts.
I mean, do you think of it as a game of strategy?
I do think of it as a game of strategy, and I'd say a game of patience and a series of mini decisions every step of the way. So in Scrabble, you get 50 bonus points if you much like in business, you get 50 bonus points if you make a 7-letter word. So you can hang out and hope that the 7 letters on your rack at any one time combine to make a 7-letter word, or you could be intentional about it and say, hey, I'm going to put aside certain letters. I'm going to trade off points in some early turns to build a good base of letters that gives me a high probability of making a 7-letter word. And so there's a fun little metaphor in there about, as leaders, I think we're always, one of the hardest things for us is to balance short term and long term, right? When do you go for the short term? When do you think long term? And it's always that tension. And so that's kind of fun in Scrabble, right? Do you take the immediate points, or do you play for the medium to long term and go for the big scores?
Yeah. And if you think about your lifetime in business, have you ever had the equivalent of a 7-letter word in your business world?
Yeah, we've had some pretty big things. I think about in my previous role, launching a digital mental health platform, especially during COVID, was really gratifying. Partnering with some of the governments in Canada to make that mental health support accessible. That was great. When I think about the role now, winning some clients that have been with other carriers for 25 years who've, taken a leap to say, okay, well, we believe in what you're building and we want to be on the journey, is the equivalent of a 7-letter word for me. It doesn't get any better.
Yeah. And what was the digital mental health program? That sounds phenomenal. How did you get that going?
Well, I was a business unit leader at the time, and we were playing with this idea of cognitive behavioral therapy. And so, cognitive behavioral therapy is this very structured approach to helping people with anxiety or depression, where you would meet someone for 10 sessions, and kind of what we found was there's a lot of stuff that you do in that 1 hour session with a therapist that you actually could do on your own time, but at the same time you needed to have some human
Mhm.
contact to, like, kind of like going to the gym. You need someone to help you stick at it. So what we're able to do is really kind of come up with a platform where it helped you to do some work on your own, but also anchored with regular access to a trained therapist to help you on that journey. And, isn't that, kind of so much of life is just really having the right support in the right way. And as leaders, it's out then figuring out, yeah, okay, and what role can technology play? And I always believe technology is not there to replace the humans, but it's there to make the humans more effective. And how do we use tech to do things that maybe are not value add? So
Mm.
if there's a workbook to complete, we don't need to do it in person and have someone watch you do it. You can do that on your own.
Yeah. I mean, that notion of technology is there to make humans better. Is that how you're thinking about AI and AI as a tool, or certainly in my own business, I can see it's replacing tasks, but it seems a long, long way away from replacing humans and actually being able to do a job. But I'd be very interested in your sort of perspective on that through the lens of the insurance industry.
Yeah, I think, well, a couple of thoughts without, kind of going through the whole insurance value chain. I think on the back end, there's a lot of task, right? Like the idea of when I look at the calls that come into our call center, it's a lot of like, what is the status of my claim? When will it get paid? So I think those are
Yeah.
things that you can use technology to get better at, that you don't have to call and talk to a human to say, okay, what's the status of my claim? Is something an eligible expense? And so I think kind of using AI more on that back end is a no-brainer. And I think every carrier is doing that. I think the more interesting thing to me is on the front end, right? When we look at in Canada, there are large portions of underinsured Canadians, and it's not because they don't understand insurance. It's because they have trust issues. They don't know who to talk to for advice. So how do they navigate what's right for me? And advice tends to skew towards, more wealth products, right? I mean, probably the wealthier you are, the easier it is to get access to advice. If you're not that wealthy, maybe it's not that easy. And so that's more intriguing to me of, how do we use AI to help guide people to the right products and the right coverage for them, right? Or still have the option to talk to a human, but we can take a lot of the heavy lifting out of the way using technology that way, and make products more accessible, and make it easier to answer questions and be underwritten and get a policy versus, having to wait for blood work or for a nurse to come to your house. So that's how I think it's more interesting to say, how do we use tech and AI to remove friction in the system and make the right products more accessible to people to help be part of their financial plan?
Yeah. I mean, do you think that over time AI will actually help people access your services more efficiently, better? Yeah. There's a lot of barriers to getting a relationship with an insurance company. Do you think AI can help you, I guess, be more approachable or more accessible?
Yeah, well, the short answer is yes, but I think it has to be done very carefully and in this idea of making, humans more accessible or more effective. So, I'd say one role AI can play is with all the pre-work, right? Often people have questions before, and I think interacting with an AI agent to say, okay, well, here's my situation, here's what I'm thinking, what might be the right
Yeah.
product for me? How much would this cost? Is it worth it? Like, I think those are all things that it's a safe space for someone to interact. And then this really differs along demographic lines, but depending on your kind of age and point in life, like, you may still want to deal with a human, and that's okay, right? So how do we actually take some of that pre-work out of the way? And often that's one of the biggest barriers, because people don't want to feel dumb or don't want to feel they're asking a dumb question. So I think that's a good use case of like, hey, let's make it more safe and get better data and recommendations, right? At the end of the day, AI is, you feed a series of data in, and it's a recommendation engine. And you want to make recommendations with a high probability. You're not going to
Yeah.
get it perfect, but if you can get the right data and the right inputs and then backstop with people. So I think that's how I think about that part of it. Hey, listen, I do think there's a part of, like, as you say, tasks or administrative roles that, can be replaced with AI. I think the bigger existential challenge there for companies to think about, again, if you're thinking beyond the short term is, if we were to use AI to replace all the humans, who would buy our products? Like who are these people that would be working, that would be able to buy our products? So I think we have to use AI very responsibly and thoughtfully. But I think there's some things where there's some use cases where we could be very thoughtful in how we deploy it.
And as a busy CEO, I mean, how do you keep pace with technology advances and advances in AI, and how do you use AI yourself? Have you got any hints and tips for other leaders or other chief executives who, it's on everybody's agenda? And, we've had some CEOs saying you've got to use it yourself. You've got to use it 20 times a day.
I'm not up to 20 times a day, but I would echo that. I think like anything else, you learn by doing, right? It's, more like we would say in business that 80% of our learnings come from experience. So, you have to experience it. And I mean, you have to experience it as not just a Google or chatbot, right? I mean, so there's a lot of things AI can do they can help with complete business models, build a website. And so it really depends on what your role is. But I think jump in and use as much as you can and become familiar. I have an executive coach I've worked with for a few years. And one of the things he's doing, I'll probably be one of the first guinea pigs, is training an AI engine for executive coaching. So to supplement what he does. So along the way, you'd be able to go to this coaching bot and say, hey, I have this business, this is underperforming, or I'm thinking of this acquisition. What should I do? And it's not going to give you a perfect answer, but it's that idea of, again, he's been doing this for 2 years, really feeding the engine. So it really depends a lot, but I'm back to just jump in and do it and start to use it and become familiar with what you can accomplish.
Brilliant. Well, we've sort of come to the end of our time. And
you were right. The time does go quickly.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, it was fantastic. That was just, there were more insights than I can keep pace with there. So absolutely brilliant, and a real pleasure to talk to you, Nigel.
No, pleasure was all mine, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Pivot Points. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find more fascinating conversations with industry leaders in our previous episodes. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to know more about Branpai and how we deliver impact in the pivotal moments that matter to you, head over to branpai.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.